I think this is about the activation of underutilized spaces and creating places for people. I am an artist. I used to be an artist, and I also used to be the administrator of the first hip-hop school in the Netherlands, or in Amsterdam. And a few years ago I met Jeff Johnson. He was one of the campaigners for Obama. And he had this really interesting quote, which I really believed in. And actually the message is sort of like from hip-hop community to hip-hop industry. And, you know, hip-hop unites several sorts of populations who are in conflict maybe with each other. But hip-hop was a statement, a social statement on the society, but now has become a sort of industry, bling bling. And that is sort of like the message of my story, also from creative community to creative industry. And this is just a really nice quote. And I really like to do projects with impact. I have 20 years of experience in self-organization, etc. And I'm going to take you through a couple of my projects in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and also in Japan, Korea, and now I'm working in Berlin. So here, this is Amsterdam. And you see the big river going through the city. And under the river, it's actually the center, or it's the city of Amsterdam. And the north part, above the river, was never actually on the map 20 years ago. If you would go to Amsterdam as a tourist, you would buy a map, a city map. You would not get a map of the north of Amsterdam. And actually, all the buildings along the waterfront, this was all industrial zone. It was, we were like the biggest shipbuilding companies in the world in 1937. And all the big buildings along the river, it was all industry. You see the central station, it's built with the back against the river and facing the canals, nice canals underneath the river, but north was not on the map. And when the industry left in the 80s, the shipbuilding industry left in the 80s due to competition with Japan and Korea, a lot of these beautiful, beautiful buildings were empty. And there was this gentrification going on in the inner city, you know, in the canal district. And it was very difficult to find place to work or to do big stuff or do things yourself. So a lot of these buildings that were empty along the water, we occupied them. And this is, for example, and these are the buildings that I've worked with. This is Frieshuis Amerika. It used to be the place where young skateboarders moved in, started their own skate park, and became very successful. But this was all sort of like in the illegal scene, like in the squatting scene. And this is such a beautiful building, but it was taken down, unfortunately. And this is the graansilo. This is the silo. It was also one of another building along the river, also empty. And also this building we occupied. I used to work with Silo Theater, it's site-specific theater. And this was actually, together with Frieshuis Amerika, the most popular places in Amsterdam in the late 80s, the late 90s. It was like seen as the Dutch avant-garde, and it was a really nice place where a lot of groups moved into. There were craftspeople that needed big space, that were artists, there were robot makers, there were also a lot of refugees that had skills and started their own cultural center. And along this area, this is, for example, Pakhuis Wilhelmina, where I used to live. And this was also a prostitute area in the 80s, beginning of the 90s. And all these buildings were occupied, and they were really the scene of Amsterdam, the club scene. Everything started here. And unfortunately, we didn't have any mobile phones at that time. So we have no pictures, we just have lovely stories. But I managed to get some of these pictures. All these buildings, and actually, you know, we 12 of these buildings were occupied and taken into use bottom up by the people themselves. Very different user groups. And due to, in the beginning of the 90s, obviously the river came into the interest of developers, and they wanted to build this new financial district along the river, this Manhattan upon it A development, and they asked one of our famous architects, Rem Koolhaas, to make a master plan for this area. And Rem Koolhaas designed the waterfront with, you know, all these beautiful historical buildings off the map. He wanted to build beautiful new luxury working space and apartments, big blocks with a highway along the river, etc. But we were in these buildings and we understood that there was this development going on, of course, but we wanted to participate in this development. So we said, why can't we be part of, you know, these buildings? We'll develop these buildings ourselves and you can build your beautiful Manhattan around it. And, you know, that didn't work. They sort of like, what? You are squatters, you are not professional developers. But, you know, these buildings were really bad, really worn down, and we really created, you know, we refurnished them, we built stuff in it. And just remember, there's no culture without subculture. It's really important to have this scene for the creative industry or whatever, or to make cities attractive anyway. And so we organized these big demonstrations. This was in 1998, it's already 20 years ago. Because all of these big buildings were evicted. 1,200 young people, creative people, refugees with great initiatives, NGOs, etc. They were all kicked out of their buildings. So we had a big protest. And we had finally we managed to persuade the mayor that there should be more policy in subculture in Amsterdam. And this quote, no culture without subculture, is our old mayor's quote. So here you can see underneath, I don't know if you see behind the chairs, there's 11, 12, 13 to 15, 16, 17, all these numbers down. These were all the buildings, some of the buildings that I showed before. They were evicted. So we had to move out to another place. So we were always moving to the edges of the town. And then because of my work as a theater maker, I already knew the old shipyard NDSM, but you can see it's on the other side of the river, and there was no ferry, no transport, so it was for everybody very far away. And everybody said I was crazy to go to the north. And this, yeah, some of our groups went to ADM, which I will come back later. This is the ADM, and this is the ADM now. It's the last free space in Amsterdam, actually. So part of the group went to ADM. This is now being evicted before Christmas this year. So if you are on Twitter, Instagram, please send out a message that we should keep this free zone in Amsterdam and don't evict it. But we chose, another group chose to do it in another way. We wanted to get a legal position. We didn't want to squat. We had been moving from one place to the other and have invested a lot of our time, creativity, but also our own money into these buildings. And by moving, we just thought it's, you know, you're wasting capital. We need a place, a fixed place for ourselves where we can stay and set up our businesses for a longer term. So this building there, this is the NDSM shipbuilding wharf. The NDSM is quite big. This is the east part there. And this is the building that I sort of fell in love with. And here you can see the old days, how it was. Huge ships were built, very big. And it was totally run down after the industry left in '84. And I don't know why, I have this fascination or love for these sort of rundown areas. which you will notice. And this is how it was when we came in for the first time. And actually, I entered a sort of competition that was set out by the government. They were looking for a cultural entrepreneur, a temporary user, actually. And they wanted to have this creative industry. But, and so they wanted me, with my group, with skateboarders and unemployed mothers and some theater makers. That was our starting group. They wanted us to evict the shipbuilders. They wanted us to evict the flea market. But no, our philosophy from the bottom up was that you should build a city from existing structures, both physical and social. Also the social networks, like the old buildings that were evicted. The users in those buildings, they created this identity for this neighborhood and made this neighborhood attractive. So these values are so crucial for the underlying values like land, price, etc. And we refused to evict the shipbuilders and said they should be part of our project or part of our ideal to make our own city at the north of Amsterdam. Of course, this was great. It was far away. There was no housing direct in the neighborhood, etc. But this is how we moved in, and our approach was, so I made a plan together with some people to renovate the building and build and design our own city and invested it and self-organize ourselves, you know, choose our own architects, our own planners, etc. And I made a plan and I won the competition and I calculated it's 30 million euro costs. And we actually need to buy the place. We cannot be a temporary user. It's so big, and there's so many people evicted, and there were already 500 people interested in moving with us to the north, that we said we need to buy it, you know, give it to us for €1. The lack of maintenance was minus 10 million, etc. But, of course, they didn't want to sell it to us. They wanted to throw it down as well in the future to build another Manhattan here. So instead of a temporary use contract for 5 years, we managed to get 10 years. And we were 10 million euros short in 10 years. So we calculated that we, with the people, with very problematic income, with skateboarders, with artists, with theater makers, with the church, there was also NGO for church and neighborhood, and refugees. We needed affordable workspace, or, you know, Amsterdam is becoming so expensive. It's throwing its subculture out of the city, and this is so important for every city. So we calculated that we, the poor, all together could account for 20 million euro ourselves. And within 10 years, we were 10 million short. So we had to organize this, and we won many prizes. And one of the nicest prizes I'd like to share is that we won a prize from the national government because we were doing a project that did not fit in within the rules and regulations. So we were doing something which is actually not possible. But we won a stimulation prize from the government, so we would come up with new rules. So for me, rules should not be a problem. It's sort of nice to think, how can we bend and change these rules and make them more accepted? Also, after winning the competition and making feasibility plans, etc., and we asked architects and financial experts, etc., to help us, no cure, no pay. We had no money in the start, but we promised if we ever get money, we will pay you back. And we won with all this beautiful artist impression, but once we signed the contract, I threw all the plans away. I said I want it to be designed by the people themselves. So when it was still a ruin, this building, I let the first 70 people in, and they all sort of took their space in the warehouse with a chalk line on the floor, like you could rent square meters for very cheap, and not so much money. And for me, it was very important to have the group there already before we actually designed it. We knew that we had to build 30,000 square meters. We knew how much we had to rent out. We knew the costs, etc. but I wanted the user group to design it themselves. That is really my passion. You know, I'm not an in-between organization doing something. I really want the people to create their own dynamics. And it worked. I'll show you. And we cleaned up. So the people who were temporary users, we set up a building team, design team, and we asked a philosopher and an architect, we hired them actually, to help us come up with our own design. And it was then very difficult to find a good architect who would be, you know, helpful to us, not putting his own design first, but let us design it. But we needed the architect to transform our design into building permissions. But we did everything ourselves. So we chose our own architects, we hired professionals, we managed to get pre-finances, we got a loan, etc. We already, when everybody moved in with, you know, in the beginning everybody had to pay, so we managed to get a little bit of money, etc. And that was sort of like an organic way of developing this building. And we built a framework in the city. This was the second milestone, that we got a permission to build a city, a framework, without any end image. This is a very sustainable structure, but it's adaptive. It can change. You know, you can build your studios in, and if you need small studios now, okay, maybe in the future you need big studios. But this is sort of our philosophy, that you need strong, sustainable, beautiful buildings like this building, which can adapt to new demands in the future. And within this framework, this is the skate park, for example. They designed their own skate park, and we built a skate park on 7 meters high. And this is how the skate park looked. And this is within the framework how we all built our own studios. So these studios are all investments by the users themselves. So as a collective, we finance with a loan the framework, but what we did inside, all these studios, there are 120 studios, we are 250 people, we all built them ourselves. So with your neighbor, you had to build the wall together, which divides your space, etc. And here are some images. And everybody was free in their own materials. The only 2 rules were, it has to be safe and it has to be hygiene. So you do have to fit or stick to the building regulations. But this has never been done before in the world, building a city in a warehouse. So here you see our square. There's still a lot of empty space. We wanted to keep it open and monumental. Now, as we were doing this, we got a lot of support from the neighborhood. We actually, the townships behind the NDSM were actually built for the factory workers. It's one of the poorest neighborhoods in the Netherlands. And of course, in the beginning, they were quite skeptical, but there were also still old shipbuilders there, but we incorporated them, and they managed to get support that now our buildings at the NDSM are protected heritage. So we managed to get a longer contract from 10 to 25 years, still not owning it, just, you know, paying rent to the government who owned the building, but at least it was protected. So we knew it was going to be a monument for the next 100, 200 years to stay, so we also put in sustainable energy structure. So this was all in 2000, 2002, 2003 that we were preparing, and we were one of the first with sustainable energy measurements. We have a heat pump, 2 wells that go 120 meters in the ground, etc. We also won a prize for that. We were the first. And this is also, yeah, you're free to design your own space. This is our welcome center as well. And the flea market, you know, the city wanted to evict the flea market. When I came in 20 years ago, they said the flea market does not fit in our idea of creative industry. But this flea market is so popular and it attracts such other user groups to the NDSM than just artists or skateboarders, etc. So it's really nice that they have become bigger and bigger and so successful, and it's not commercial stuff, it's really the old stuff you have on the attic that people can sell, and it's great. Now here's the building now, years later, when it's already, yeah, so this, all the work, all the construction work, we were managing it all ourselves. And this is the restaurant of the unemployed mothers. You remember I started with the unemployed mothers and the skateboarders. These mothers had this beautiful idea of building a restaurant with used materials, but they were not seen as professional entrepreneurs by the government, so it was very difficult for them to find a space in the city. So when I moved to the north, I asked Jolien, my girlfriend, would you like to come with me to the north and maybe we can do the restaurant there? Because our concept was the NDSM should be a place where things happen which are not possible anywhere else. And so she built the restaurant, and this is now at the Amsterdam Dance event, Hangover Party, it facilitates now. And this is now one of the most popular restaurants in the top 25 as in investment or, you know, as in money-wise. And the mothers are not unemployed anymore, of course, and they're giving work to lots of young people. So it's sort of interesting to see that these initiatives, like the mothers, also the skateboarders, they were just kids from the street, but they set up the only skate park in the Netherlands that did not depend on subsidy, that paid rent, a lot of rent, and had 11 employed people, and were also seen as the top-rated skate park in Europe. So this is just fantastic. This is Plek. This is a restaurant also initiated by a filmmaker. He had no catering experience, but he started his own restaurant. But also this is a temporary project. You know, the government is only allowing initiatives and spaces to us that really create livelihood and identity and make cities attractive. They see it as temporary projects, but still this is Plek. And of course we have a lot of open space. We all have a love for the outdoor areas, so we have a lot of space for these big festivals. And what you're seeing now is from the creative community, you see it's becoming more creative industry. Every city is promoting this, seeing us as placemakers, but that is the first step to sort of a gentrification. And also the festivals are becoming more industry, bling bling. There are some festivals like Volt that are all about sustainability, but some are very commercial. But still, there should be a place for everybody. This is our clubhouse, Sexyland. It's an art project with an opening every day. So 365 days a year, we have an opening every day. Check it out. And this is the NDSM. And you see our building there. You see the other building there, Make Art Not Euro. And this is also a new project. This was bought by a developer 20 years ago. He actually got money from the government to buy it, but he did not do anything with the building. But the director, the manager of the flea market, met a graffiti artist in our project, and they decided, they became really good friends. And they are now transforming this building into one of the biggest street art museums in Europe. So this is a nice, way of people meeting and setting up new initiatives. And what we also did for the open public space, which I think is quite interesting, with all the building owners and user groups, we set up a separate foundation for the maintenance and programming of the outdoor space. Also together with the government, because the government is responsible for safety, etc. in public space. So they are one of the partners, but also all the building owners are partners, and we finance the foundation with a part of our rent. So we donate money into this foundation. And that's how we really have influence in what's happening in the public space as well. So that's interesting. And of course, this led to many other projects. This NDSM is quite famous, But I've been working with residential parts in the southeast, and people are coming up to me, developers and housing corporations, like, oh, Eva, you were so successful at the NDSM. Could you make a hotspot out of my building now? And I say, no, I can't make a hotspot. You need the people. Where are the people? If there's a group of people that want to do something in this building, of course, I'm happy to share my experience, but I cannot make it. I'm not a wonder doctor. It's up to the people. So my motto is always first the people and then you have a project. But we did find a group, and they transformed this Heesterveld creative community with very famous music, hip-hop artists, etc. And they transformed this building themselves, which was one of the baddest neighborhoods in the southeast, and now it's a really beautiful place. And our night mayor, Shamiro, lived here, so this is especially for Shamiro. Here is Osaka. Also, a real estate, big rich man asked me, can you do the same, what you did at NDSM in Japan? But in Osaka, there's no creative sector. There's no people working in the creative scene. It's the population, about 60% is 75 years and older. So there was not very easy to find a market to have artists here who are able to sell their products or organize big parties in which they can earn money. So instead of making this, there were no people, I did start an artist program, an artist in residence. So I organize every year an artist from the NDSM to go and stay there for 3 months and work on a project. And this is a carpet made in the building. And of course, you can see we need big spaces to make these big artworks. And this is a beautiful story. And this is a flat carpet, but it's painted or printed like it's three-dimensional. And this we exhibited, we made it at the Namura in Osaka, but we exhibited in one of the most expensive towers in the city of Osaka. Millions of people would walk over the carpet every day, but that's how we managed to attract attention to the neighborhood, to the Namura shipyard, where there's nobody there. And this is Seoul, also a temporary, it's an island in the Han River, also done by a group of young people. They're inspired by my work, and they wanted to do it in a similar way as how I did. And the funny thing is, when they started, they said, there's all these allotments and gardening, which is already there. There's a lot of old people having their urban gardens, so it's not this trend, it's just there already. And these young people said, and then we will transform this part because the forest on the other side is too difficult. And then I persuaded them to look at it in another way. There's already people there working in their gardens. You should not kick them out. You should develop from there. And the forest, which is very difficult, that's the place where you have to focus your development on. Take out the young trees, make a catwalk, build in your music studios. This is going to be a music island. And build the music studios in the forest, and build a restaurant and use the ingredients from the garden to create restaurants. So develop from existing structures. What is already there? There's already a community there. And now the most famous cooks of Korea are having their television programs on the island with the ingredients from there. But it's nice to sort of help people look at it in a different way. And now I'm working at Berlin Tempelhof in Berlin. I don't know if you know this big project. I'm an advisor there and a consultant. They want to have a participatory approach at Berlin, and I'm asked by the government, and they have no idea about participation. They think, you come up with ideas and we see what we can do. And I really fought hard to, at least now, it's 300,000 square meter, give 10,000 square meter to the club scene, to the subculture scene, and let them organize it themselves instead of setting up this big organization from the government. No, give the space, 10,000 square meter or 20,000, it's big enough, and let the group organize it themselves. That's how you create dynamics and create identity. And they're sort of like, oh, well, we'll give you 2,000, I read in the email today. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to settle with 2,000. The group is too small. It's, with 10,000, you have a nice group. And I wrote a book about 20 years of self-organization. And I want to hand it over to the wonderful organizers of this beautiful festival, to Georgi and Sergi. Please come up, I can give you my book. It's the whole book, the whole process. It's a handbook. It's for the next generation. And I would like to give this book to you. And
thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Amazing work.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, thank you.